Miniature Wargaming the movie. Now, I put money into this about 2.5 years ago. And I put money into it even though Henry Hyde, a gentleman who basically got me kicked off a podcast, did a large portion of the narration. His narration is not particularly good. I put in money with the vain hope that if there was a good movie about miniature wargaming, then it might give some degree of insight and some degree of, I don't know, just pick up this community in a way which interests me greatly. So I put in the money with the hope of that, and I really need to stop putting money into, well, it's interesting, I'm pretty even associated with Kickstarter documentaries. The one on the island of cats was just amazing. I mean, that was a really good documentary. It was quirky, it juxtaposed the cats and the people. That was an amazing documentary, and I'm really, really glad that I put money into that documentary. And I think that was a documentary where it was clear that the documentary maker had a very particular perspective. The fellow that put together Miniature Wargaming the movie didn't have that perspective. It was kind of like a half-hearted attempt of some of the stuff that you see maybe on the commercial channels in the UK. And it wasn't really a documentary. He was caught up in drone footage of their children, a bunch of people that had really nothing to do with miniature wargaming, talking about their mental health and a variety of other things. And then probably 20 to 30 minutes worth of really quite interesting footage, although now outdated because it was recorded about 2 years ago, with some really interesting people that I think could have been the entire movie. My view is that if he had, an hour and a half worth of footage of these folk edited together, it would have actually been very interesting. And Henry Hyde wasn't really necessary. Like, his narration was actually really bad, and the timing is all wrong with Henry Hyde. He has a narrative thing where he just talks. He's not referencing anything. It's associated with his memories of certain things. And when he got things wrong, which he did, they maintained his voiceover, but just added in additional things in timelines and stuff. So it was a very curious, and I stopped it. I watched about 15 minutes of it, and I just had to shut it off. And it was just really, really boring. I mean, the first 4 people in it have got nothing. I mean, they're basically losers that haven't gotten their stuff together, and they're like, "Oh, we'll do scenery companies, and we'll do this stuff." And look, I mean, I'm sure they're delightful gentlemen to spend time with. They're just not very compelling people to be put in front of for a documentary. For me, the number of people that have the size of the wargaming market in the UK is phenomenal. It's created by 1- and 2-person operations. I mean, obviously, you've got Games Workshop and you've got Warlord Games, a bunch of other manufacturers that are large. But yeah, look, there's a beautiful thing about the UK associated with tiny miniature manufacturing companies. But the ones that interest me of that genre are ones that have been doing it for 30-odd years and still maintain that. Getting a bunch of kids talking about their divorces and various other psychologies and just cost of living and all this kind of stuff. It's just like, okay, I live that life on some level. It's got really nothing to do with miniature wargaming. So it's a film that would have taken so much more if the guy had just gotten critical external feedback early on. And in that light, I'm really annoyed. I debated contacting him within the first year and just saying, do you want someone to watch this who's going to be critical, who, I can't use the fact of where I work, but I can say I've watched a lot of documentaries and I'm very critical about this film. It's interesting, actually, because Model Citizens, which is a Kickstarter documentary that's about the train community, which I didn't back, but I've watched a couple of times, is okay. It's not brilliant. It suffers from, to a lesser extent, what Miniature Wargames the movie suffers from, in terms of it just being a bit cringy in a variety of different places. But it is very much the people that back the film get to feature in the film. I don't think that's what Miniature Wargames the movie was about. Although maybe, who knows. But yeah, it's a lot of people that were big in wargaming and then dropped off relatively swiftly, 2-3 years ago. And actually, my view is concentrate on the people that have been doing it for 30 years. Get their views and understanding. I mean, it does have some footage of that, but it's also precursory. The fellow that created it, I mean, maybe he did, but the Henry Hyde account just doesn't give the depth, doesn't give the interaction, doesn't give the buyouts, all this kind of stuff. The transitions underlying this thing are actually really fascinating, but they're documented in old publications. You need to actually do some research to bring together the story in a compelling format. And unfortunately, this documentary just misses the mark on so many different levels. So it's about 30 minutes worth of really interesting footage put into an hour and 50 minutes, which is just really, really, really troublesome and tiresome. And I just found myself fast forwarding and seeking and moving through and just cutting out all the additional stuff. You don't need to know about people's economic situation that you have they're not compelling. So you've got no introduction. You don't know why you should care about these people. And my wife tells me that I'm way less caring than I once was. So I'm way less sympathetic to the stuff. But increasingly, I just don't need to know about other people's foibles that have nothing to do with the actual subject matter here. And if you're going to give a history or an account or a level of detail associated with miniature wargaming, you probably need to have a background understanding and a really good sense of the history that doesn't just come from one rambling dude who, quite frankly, I don't rate. And I've had a personal interaction with him not to rate him. So, yeah, it is one of these curious things that it could have been a much better film. So, I don't know where one goes. I mean, there's some pretty cringy role-playing game movies, which I watch and were comfortable with, even though they were really cringy. And yes, did get into the dirty laundry of people that aren't major figures in the role-playing industry, but are just guys that hung around the documentary makers of various times. So I'm familiar with the genre in that light. I just thought this was particularly bad even within that genre, which gives a huge capacity to produce some degree of insights. So yeah, it's kind of sad because, I guess the most information that I've gotten out of this is reading things like the Citadel Journal, which gives a really detailed account of a lot of the background to Games Workshop in a really fascinating, candid fashion, written in the early to mid-90s, which you'd actually have to read. Maybe mid-2000. I don't know when it stopped, but it stopped probably about 2000, 2002. But that publication, candidly, through candid editorials, actively talked about how there were a series of changes that made Games Workshop into the company that it is, and many of these companies that came out of Nottingham have all had connections with Games Workshop in one way or another. And I've backed a book about the founders of Games Workshop that I think may or may not be funded. There was an option to put in money where you could actually have lunch with the founders of Games Workshop, and I was on the cusp of putting in money to that extent. I probably should have, particularly because I'm going to be in the UK in February, because I actually think these people are fascinating in terms of just taking concepts which fundamentally are Tolkien-esque, also other, mythology and folk concepts, and then just making it into a business which has survived now for 40 years, amazingly. That is something that is surreal, to create this thing which is self-fulfilling and ultimately inspires children. Still, remarkably. So that is a beautiful story, and to have the actual founders tell that story, that's something that I'm backing and interested in. This one I backed, just in case it was good. Miniature Wargames movie, no, unfortunately fell far short. I was disappointed. I still have this thing on my hard disk. I'm going to remove it in the next couple of days. Just leave it for the ether. I might give it a second watch through, second seek through. Maybe I'll provide an edited version. I'll just cut it down to the bits that I like and enjoy it that way. I'll just have 10 chapters of Miniature Wargames, the movie, which were actually the interesting parts. Cut out all the drone footage, all the creepy dudes with their kids and stuff like that, and just concentrate on real people who actually have contributed to this industry, which I find fascinating. Anyway, that's what I can say to this review.